So how do we put all of this together? Well, anybody who's in Southend may have met myself, Maria and Gavin before, when in March of last year we went down to give a talk about some of this work. And what we wanted to do was to use the luciferase assay to measure neutralizing antibodies and the biomarker induction, so these proteins that we can measure, and combine them so that we would have better guidelines to interpret the results we were giving people with our neutralizing antibody assay. So the plan was to recruit 150 people and to take blood samples before they inject with interferon, and they would go home that night and inject and come back to us 12 hours later, and we would take the second set of blood. So far we've recruited 142 people. We haven't fully tested all of them, so 118 we have results from. And it's a usual split that we often have more women than men, as with MS itself. The mean age was 45, and there's quite a large range. The time since they were diagnosed was a mean of 11 years, but again, a very big range from 1 year to 34. And the time from diagnosis to treatment, again, was a huge separation. We only included people who either were treated with Rebif or betaferon for the reason that only less than 5% of people treated with Avonex will have neutralizing antibodies, and what we were interested in capturing were people who were positive. So these are the numbers that we have so far. And what we found, which has been shown before, is that in those who are neutralizing antibody negative or have quite low levels of neutralizing antibodies, we see quite a good response of this MXA protein, the biomarker I've mentioned. In the middle here, we have people with neutralizing antibody titers from about 100 to 600, and some have a partial response, but generally it's quite flat. And what we see here in the top end is that there's really no response to the injection at all, and this occurs around a titer of 600. And this is just another way of showing it. There's quite a spread of how much of this MXA protein is induced after injection, but what we see is in those who are truly negative, showing no inhibition of interferon activity in the luciferase assay, we see good induction of MXA. In those who are below the cutoff of what we call a positive titer, it's pretty similar. And again, in those who have low positive titers between 20 and 100, these all look quite the same, and there was no significant difference when we tested this. However, people who are falling into this grey zone of 100 to 600, they see a fall off. It does overlap a little bit, but there is a general fall off in how much of the MXA protein or how much of a response they're having to their treatment. And in those with high titers above 600, we saw very little, almost no response at all. So just to conclude, as I mentioned, interferon is a biological therapy, and as with all the other protein therapies, the body can recognize it as being foreign material and mount an immune response to it to eradicate it. And these antibodies can stop the drug working, as I've shown. A simple blood test can show whether these neutralizing antibodies are present or not, and we have developed this assay and it's freely available on the NHS now. It's actually in the laboratory at Queen's Square. But we also now are here going to set up the MXA assay. So for people that we're not quite sure, they're in the middle zone of neutralizing antibody titers, and we want to know in that particular individual, is the drug working or not? And so many of you may have actually already taken part in this study, and you're one of the people listed in my results. And for any others who would like to take part, we are still very happy to recruit. And you can talk to myself or Maria Espasandin, and we can send on some information. Thank you.